It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Molly Sargent, founder and CEO of ProImpress. Molly is a dynamic keynote speaker, a master facilitator, and author of the forthcoming book, Mastering Authentic Influence. Since 1985, Molly has successfully trained and coached tens of thousands of trusted advisors and teams, and the leaders who love them, to wield greater positive influence in their client-facing and colleague collaborating exchanges, face-to-face, voice-to-voice, and pen-to-pen. The focus of Molly's training and coaching is on helping trusted advisors and trusted experts make the most of precious FaceTime with clients and colleagues. She began teaching her course participants how to successfully and pragmatically leverage mindfulness practices in everyday business exchanges. She playfully refers to this research-supported curriculum as spinach and the cookies, so named because these extra skills are mixed into every core training from ProImpress. Molly Sargent, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you so much, Brent. Nice to see you, and thanks for having me.
Great to have you here, and we've had a chance to chat a couple of times over the last couple of months. I've so been looking forward to this. You've had a wonderful career, and like myself, have reinvented yourself as we've gone through the pandemic. And you know what we always like to kind of start with is the early years and kind of where you grew up and what your early family life was like. So tell us a little bit about that. Are you from Connecticut originally?
I am not, and I know you're a neighbor of mine, somewhere up in the state of Connecticut. So I'm
That's
down near
right.
New York City. No,
Okay.
I came to Connecticut in 1986, and it was to work in computer software. And I worked
Ah,
with a guy by the name of Andrew Tobias, and he wrote the first financial management software program for personal computers. It was called Managing Your Money. And he was a wonderful guy. I worked with some really smart people early on in computer software and in Westport. And one of the things that was so, um, uh, I didn't realize it at the time that I was in the middle of something big. And I had the opportunity to travel all over the country with this keynote speaker introducing computers to people. And at the time, you couldn't just tell people how to use a computer to manage finances. You had to tell people how to what a computer was, what a floppy
right,
disk
right.
was, how they work together. So that was kind of awesome. So my I left Philadelphia and
Ah, was that
Pennsylvania.
was that home, Philadelphia? Is that where you grew
That
up?
was home,
Yeah,
yeah.
got it, got it.
And to come up here, and I remember traveling down a street in this little town called Rowayton, and I got halfway down the road, and I thought, I'm going to live here. I just had this
That's a nice
knowing
place.
I must live in this town with the sailboats, and everyone was out biking, and there were octogenarians hanging out with 20-year-olds, and I thought, this is an incredible place. And then I rounded a corner and met somebody and said, I'm going to marry him. And both things
There
happened.
you go. Well, let's rewind a little bit though, back to Philadelphia in the early
Yeah.
years. Mom
hmm
and dad, what do they do? And
Yeah.
brothers and sisters, tell us a little bit about that.
So I'm one of six kids from an Irish Catholic family.
Wow.
And
Okay.
yeah. And
Were you in
I,
that?
I
Were you in the rank order, middle, top, end?
I have a sister and a brother who are ahead of me, but not by many
Oh,
months. And then
right, right.
I was born, and that was 1, 2, 3 years in a row. and then
Wow.
3 younger brothers, and the two after were born in very quick succession, and then my youngest brother, who's 10 years younger than I am.
Got it. Got it. So mom obviously worked in the home. What about dad?
Yeah, mom worked in the home, and dad, my father was actually from a fairly poor family, and I suppose this is cogent to what we're talking about, and what it means to become a CEO, and what it means to start your own business, and then to tough it out to get through the things that are going to come into your purview as a CEO. Um, my father became a river ship pilot, which many
Oh,
people don't know a lot about, but it's a wonderful thing to he goes out on a launch, or he did, and would climb up the side of a ship out by the at the mouth of the river, in his case the Delaware River, and become captain of that
wow.
ship coming in from anywhere in the world.
Because
And
he
he
knows
would
the
be
channel, right? He
because he knows the
basically,
channel,
yeah.
and that
Wow.
really is the thing.
Cool.
And so to be able to climb up, take control of a
Ooh,
massive tanker full of oil, and bring it through the shifting shoals of a 90-mile river stretch,
wow.
it kind of introduced me to the ruggedness of what it means to be self-employed. In his case,
Yeah.
he's part of an association, or he was, and that's slightly different, being part of an association of people, but rather than completely a CEO or completely on your own. But there is something about having been self-determined and
Sure.
self-realized that I think was very influential in everything that I did.
Yeah. Cool. What were some of the other inspirations or influences that affected you in those early years?
Well, I think one of the things which was kind of interesting to me, so it's an Irish Catholic family, and my father, having come from poverty, and this is I think this is an important point for people to understand, is how to contextualize what you might learn from somebody early on versus what is relevant today, and how to perhaps be a little soft and forgiving, even though it might have been somewhat detrimental. So, my father did not believe that women should go to school past high school,
Wow.
and he didn't think it was worth the investment. And he was just a pragmatic guy in a lot of ways. But really, the issue was that it was not financial. He came from poverty, and he aspired to be more like the wealthy people whom he came to meet through his career.
Sure.
And one of the things that he began to realize is that a lot of the wealthy people, their wives didn't work. So now we're going back to
Interesting.
the
Oh, yeah. 30s
1950s
and
for this
20s. Yeah.
mindset.
50s. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
fast forward, he has 2 girls and 4 boys, and he puts the boys through law school and med school, and the girls he was reluctant to send to college. So my sister and I actually snuck out of the house, she before I did, but snuck out of the house to apply for college and got into
Wow.
school
Wow.
and
Yeah. And
paid
did
for
you
our
have to
own
go
way to
on
go through it.
scholarship or yeah, pay for your own way? Wow.
I managed to become a resident assistant at Penn State University. It
Yep.
was in-state tuition at the time, which already made it not very expensive. But then I became a resident assistant, and that paid for room, board, and half my
Yeah.
tuition.
Right.
So
Yeah.
by
You're
the
going
time
for it.
and
Yeah.
then I got a partial scholarship to study over in France, and I did that for a year, and I got a job there teaching English as a second language at one of the universities in Tours, below Paris. So there were a lot of things that just uh, had me realizing that you can do what you need to do. You're just going to have to get a
Yeah.
little scrappy.
Well, and rebellious. What did Dad
A little
say or
rebellious.
do? Yeah. What did Dad say or do when he found out about that? What's
Well, it
he?
was funny for somebody who wasn't going to pay for the education, that he had quite a few opinions about it,
Right.
about
Right.
what would be worthy to undertake study wise and so forth. So I think he got on board. I think he was
Yeah.
very much about education. He was a self-educated person himself, and
Right.
he
Right.
loved. We were extensive in our reading. We were paid $1 to memorize poetry, among other things, pages and pages of poetry. So I can give you, start to recite some poetry for someone at a cocktail party. Makes it very interesting at times. So
Love
there
it.
were things that he just did that were disciplines around self-education that I think were ironically counter to that one moment in time where he didn't think that maybe college was the best investment.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
eventually he got on board.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of activities were you involved with as a youth? Was there sports, music? You obviously did some work as well to squirrel away some funds for that. Tell us a little bit about those things.
Well, I was I went I was a captain of the cheerleaders. I was vice president of my class and president of my class, I think, and then vice president of my school in senior year.
Right.
And so I was mostly involved in things that were about leadership. I was a runner, not so
Yeah.
much as my sister, who was is an amazing runner, has run for 40 years. But I was a runner and a gymnast, and mostly solo sports. I wasn't much of a team sport person,
Yeah.
but a lot of solo sports, except for if you consider cheerleading a
Right.
sport.
Right.
We were fairly athletic at the time. But yeah.
Sure.
Mhm.
What about entrepreneurial things? Were there things that you did to raise money going through high school, coming up to college?
Well, I started working when I was very young,
Yeah.
babysitting and then doing things like working at Burger King and whatever it would take to just make some money. Uh,
Right.
and I loved that. I really did enjoy being inside a business, and it served me when I first got into business in when I was in computer software, because I already understood what it meant to be in retail. And so here
Mm.
I was trying to bring software into a marketplace that didn't really exist except in, uh, it was in its nascence back in the early
Right.
80s.
Right.
And so understanding what it meant to be in a retail organization and how to appeal to clients and what the staff in those stores would need in order to be successful. So I did a lot of things that had to do with retail just because it was easy to get the jobs. They were
Sure.
close by, so it was easy to get there. Yeah.
And great customer service experience, right? I mean, that public facing types of jobs are terrific in terms of developing your relationships with others.
But that part became fairly evident to me, probably to the people around me more so than to me. I just was
Right.
having a lot of fun meeting people. And I think people started noticing, hey, she has a lot of fun meeting people.
She's got a
And
personality. Yeah.
well, I love to deeply connect, and I can make I enjoy getting to know someone in a very short period of time and understanding just how much influence you can have in one another's lives through a very brief interaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that came through in the way that I conducted myself in my early, let's not even call it career, it was really jobs, but also in my
Sure.
leadership positions. And then I remember probably fast forward, it might be too early for where you're headed in the interview, but one of the early jobs that I had was working in Darien, Connecticut with a small company that did sales training into financial services. And
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
I had been able to stand up in front of rooms of adults and teach because of my experience with Andrew Tobias and because of my career in teaching English as a second language, all of a sudden I was working with people who were sending me into all these financial services companies, Bank of America, Citibank, and so on,
Right.
back in the 80s. And they began to notice that not only could I teach in front of the rooms, but that I was converting into upsells. And they were
Mm.
noticing that the intimacy that I was creating with my contacts on site made it easier either for them to sell or that I'd be introducing things inadvertently just as a need to help them solve a problem that I heard them say, well, we happen to do something in our firm for another organization, and it might be helpful to you as well. So all of a sudden I was becoming instrumental in selling and didn't
Yeah.
even realize it. I was just connecting really well with people and offering solutions to problems that they were bringing to my attention because we had such great connection.
I love
And before
that.
you know it,
I love that.
I remember the very first, even before Andrew Tobias, I was working with a software company in Philadelphia just for a very short period of time. It was called Eagle Software. And I was going out teaching people again how to be effective using computers out in the retail world. But I wasn't selling. But I came back to the office one day from, I think I came back from Texas early on, and my boss was so excited. He had this box that he wanted to give to me, and he handed it to me. It was a box of my first business cards, and I opened it up,
Oh.
and it said sales representative on it, and I burst into tears.
Oh.
Because I said,
I love that.
I don't sell.
Yeah.
I I work with people, I train people, I teach people, I connect with people, but I didn't think of myself as a salesperson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and to me, salesperson had somewhat of a negative
Negative
connotation to it.
connotation. Yeah, right,
So
right.
that was an early introduction to the fact that someone had recognized that I was good at connecting, good at identifying what was going on, good at positioning what we had in a way that actually was influential and converted people. And they labeled it sales, and I didn't recognize that that's actually what I love to do.
That's great. What was that first job you took out of Penn State?
And so it was with I was walking through Grand Central Station. I tell millennials this now, or younger professionals, and they're like, "That really happened." I was walking through Grand Central Station, and I recognized someone from I don't even know where. I think it was I go to Cape May, New Jersey, most of the summers during my youth, and I recognized this man walking across Grand Central, and I walked over. I said, "Aren't you?" And David, and he said, "Well, yes, I am." And we got talking in Grand Central Station. He said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I teach English as a second language, but I'm up in New York for an interview." And he said, "You teach adults?" I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Well, I'm with a little company called Eagle Software in Philadelphia." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "And we need somebody to go around and
Mm,
teach people how to use computers. And it's adults. And since you not only teach, but you teach adults, would you be willing to do that?" I said, "I'd love to."
wow.
This was on a Wednesday.
Wow.
He said, "We need you in New Orleans on Monday."
I love it. I
And I
love it.
said,
He had a
"Can
specific need.
do."
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. So you
Yeah.
went straight down to New Orleans the following day. Did you bother to get a letter of employment along the way, or
I
did you
think I
just
did.
roll
I
with
think I think
it?
I think although if I to leave it to me, but I didn't, because those were the days where you shook hands and everyone
Yeah,
agreed to
that's
that
true.
point. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
other piece that I think is really instrumental, and this kind of gets to a foundation of a lot of what I do inside business now. Um, I had friends who had gone to Penn State, and they were studying, which at the time it no longer exists, but they were studying travel agency work. And the
Right,
reason that they
right,
wanted to be travel agents is because they would get to travel so much. So
right,
here I
right.
come back in, and I'm calling my friend saying, "Hey, I got this really cool job. I'm headed to New Orleans, and I'm going to be going to California. And before that, I'm going to be going to Chicago." And here they are sitting behind computers, having taken their jobs and their careers in the direction of so that they can travel. And how dare I, with my teaching degree, turn around and start traveling all over?
I
So
love it.
it fast forward on that theme of look for the behavior, not for the title.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
and
important.
that became foundational to almost everything I did going forward, and also became foundational in the work that I started to do. So for I worked for 8 years for Development Dimensions International, DDI, and they have a beautiful website I recommend, ddiworld.com. And I had the privilege to get in there in, I think it was 1990. It was early on in the success level of DDI, which was a very influential human resources company. And I had the chance often to work with the founder, Bill Byam. And Bill used to say all the time, "Do not pay attention to the fads and the titles. Go to the behavior. It's the most sustainable
Mm,
thing that you can do." So
so
when
true.
TQM and total quality management and team dynamics all became faddishly transitional through the 90s. It didn't matter. We were always at the behavior level, which is the sub level,
Hmm,
and
hmm.
it doesn't change. That's deep, deep ocean. Whereas all of these other
Right.
thematic things that are going on happen to be more like white caps on the surface. Meanwhile, deep underneath is what's the behavior and how do you identify it? How do you hire for it? How do you train to it? How do you hold it accountable and measure its impact? And if you can stay at that level, or at least have that on your radar, that's where your human resources become most influential and most
Yeah.
easily selected, uh, cultivated, hired, and made to be happy.
Right, right. It's the true north, isn't it? Yeah. When was
Yeah.
the first time you started managing people, Molly?
It was at DDI,
Hmm.
and I would say I started managing people mostly from an influence standpoint rather than a title standpoint.
Yeah.
So I was selling by the time I got to DDI in the 90s. And what I would need to do is not only identify and prospective clients and go and sell them, but then I would help to resource and manage those
Yeah. And what year
projects, or
was
pretty
that?
much head up that part of it. And it was a shared services capability. So I began to understand the importance of needing to influence people and make sure that they understood the fundamentals of what was going on, get them to buy in and get equally enthusiastic about it so that they'd want to be there, because they had options of where they
Right.
spent their time.
Right.
There were people doing similar jobs to what I was doing in different regions or different territories, and I would need to go and collect these people and make sure that they stayed connected with my clients and stayed connected with the agendas that we had, and do it on time. So I really consider the first management of a team that I did was really more an influence of, you know, almost like mercenaries, if you will,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
needing to create a context that had them feel like that they were part of something, even though I didn't really have the title to expect anything from them beyond what they were willing to give me.
Yeah. Yeah. We've all had mentors and perhaps a few tormentors along the way in our career. Tell
Mm.
us a little bit about a few that you've had of both.
Um, mentors, and I've had so many incredible mentors, both intentional and unintentional, I would say.
Yeah.
The probably the earliest ones are that gentleman who recognized that I could stand up
Right.
uh,
Right.
in front of people, and asked me to, sight unseen, asked me to come to New Orleans and be in front of his clients. That's a high risk point. So
Proposition.
being
Yeah.
yeah, and so being recognized by somebody and then cultivated into and invited into a company, what a privilege, to be part of something that they'd created and given access. Um, and then when I went into this little company in Darien called Consultative Resources Corporation, it was a magical group of people. They had all come from a company out of Cambridge that was affiliated with Harvard and an MIT project, as I understood it, where it was the early days of creative problem solving in a focus group context. And they learned how to ask questions and listen intently in a focus group context. And they thought, this would really apply. It's the late 70s.
Mm.
This would really apply in a sales organization. So they brought those concepts forward into what we now know as consultative selling. And I I spent 5 years with them from, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the dates. I believe it was around 85 to 90, let's call it. And every quarter, everyone in the company would have a sit down with every other person in the company,
Mm.
and we would spend about 15 to 20 minutes together, each person in the company with every other person, and we would answer the questions: what do I really enjoy about working with you? And we'd need to be
Mm.
specific in our anecdotes that we told, and behavioral in our anecdotes that we told. And what, if anything, would we recommend to one another about how we might grow in our ability to work more closely and more effectively together?
Wow.
And we
Terrific.
did that quarterly.
Yeah.
The other thing that
Yeah.
happened, and this was amazing, I spent the first 6 months of that time traveling around with them with zero expectation other than I take notes and pay attention. I mean, that just
Wow.
is not done anymore. And
Right.
then the
Right.
third thing that was remarkable was we were put on videotape almost every week of 5 years, and we would play back the videotapes of us engaged in client meetings, or
Right.
over the phone, obviously, or
Right.
engaged in teaching in front of a room, and we'd have a camera on, and someone in the company would give us feedback on how we were
Wow.
comporting ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, not only an underpinning of behavioral specificity and attention to what are you saying, what are you doing at any given moment, but on top of it, to have the commitment of these people to my cultivation, knowing that I could leave the company at any time. I did not I knew how special it was because no one else was doing it, but I didn't
Right.
realize how extraordinary it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very, very
Terrific.
grateful to those people. Yeah.
I love it. We've talked a lot about behaviors, and we've all grown up. And I, I mentioned the tormentor somewhat in jest, but I know we can all kind of also cite certain things that we've seen in others, not to mention any names, where you go, "Wow, I just never want to do that." share with us some of the things that you've seen, in management leaders maybe that you work closely with, or maybe even at clients that were really, kind of resonating for you as to that's the kind of person I do not want to be.
Yeah. So you can edit this part out if you are so desiring. Um, I like to say I can work with anyone on the planet, and I mean that truly. I can work with anyone on the planet under one condition, that we each are committed to knowing when the other one is being an asshole, and we know when we are ourselves. Like,
I
go
love
ahead and
that.
be a jerk.
This
Like,
will
I'll
not be
be
edited out.
okay.
It's so true, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I can be in a room with someone and be there's a concept of being consciously unconscious. So I can be with anyone anywhere on the planet and work with them intently. But when I get to a point where either they recognize or I recognize one of us is being an asshole, and as long as both of us are on the same planet, we're
Right.
happy about understanding that that's the case. So I can tolerate the context in which someone says, I'm going to go a little consciously unconscious right now. I'm going to indulge myself. Would you be willing to hear?
Mm,
And then they become that jerk for a minute and a half, or I do. And I say,
right. Right.
this isn't working, that's not working, even to the point where I say, and it's all your fault. And they're still
Right.
listening patiently, kindly, so that I can go, I know this is about me. And I know I'm going to have to shift this. But right now, it's about I need to move the energy that's here that's blocking me. I need to hear myself speak about something that's frustrating. And later I'll be open to feedback later. And it could be five
Yeah.
minutes from now or 5 months from now. I don't know. But I'm going to want to really delve in and find out what's going on. But right now I
Right.
just need to move energy. So the people I have the hardest time being in a room with are the ones are not who are creating negative waves through a
Yeah.
team and not aware that they are the catalyst of
They're the
those
source of
negative
it.
waves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what so their primary job or their primary behavior is projection, because
Right.
they'll
Right.
recognize that something's wrong, but they won't bring it back to their own contribution.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what it does is it leaves the team befuddled, and they
Right.
don't know how the heck to tell the boss,
Right.
hey, maybe there's something here for each of us, sure. But
Right.
are you aware of your instigation of these issues that we're having? Are you willing to take this on? And only the bravest of them will step up and say something.
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
the bravest.
I
And
love it.
and it's unfortunate because I watch teams go down in flames when everyone except the boss knows what's going on,
Yeah.
and the
Everyone
boss
else can
can't
see it.
be approached.
Right.
And
Of course.
and
Yeah.
so
It's
it
too
just
threatening.
continues. Everyone stumbles along until finally it either falls apart or someone gets frustrated and says it, but they get fired, but everyone else benefits downstream from the fact that the feedback was delivered. And you think, there, there, but by the grace of God go I. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Melanie. Well, just as a little bit about our history, we first connected before the pandemic. We were
Yeah.
planning to do the podcast. Of course, we all went into that tunnel.
Hmm.
And we both kind of went through a mutual transformation. And I want to hear
Yeah.
about yours because Pro
Mm.
Impress has come out differently the other side. And share with us a little bit about kind of the thinking process that you went through, how you kind of changed your life in so many ways. And really now, for the balance of our time, tell us about Pro Impress and your relaunch that's coming up soon.
How lovely. Thank you for the invitation. ProImpress was cranking along. I started ProImpress in 2009, right after the market
Yeah.
crashed.
Same
And
year we were founded, interestingly. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, and I
Yeah.
had a different company called SkillSpring that I started in 97. So I actually started the first business, but for legal reasons, I changed the name of the company, and it was called Professional Impressions Consulting. By the way, I had to change. I happened to be able to get the URL proimpress.com, so I went with that. And then later I changed the company name, DBA, doing business as, to ProImpress, because my clients kept needing to look at the screen in order to introduce me at a keynote. And I thought, that's not good if your client can't remember the name of
Right.
your company. So I changed. I just started using ProImpress instead of Professional Impressions Consulting. It's a whole lot easier to say. So in we spent the majority of the fourth quarter of 2019 building business. And we had a really good running start coming into 2020. We had lots of work on the books. I hired 2 new people right after Thanksgiving, so
Yep.
ramped them all up in December, and we were relaunching our website, recasting. We were doing everything. This was gonna be our banner year, and I can't remember exactly the day, but it was early. It was probably mid-February actually. Every one of our clients, and we work for major corporations, Fortune 50 companies, some of the biggest pharmaceuticals, financial services, professional services, and we started getting calls to cancel the work. And in
Mm.
48 hours, 100% of our business fell out of the books.
Wow.
And I remember, and this is, thank heaven, I had started doing mindfulness training with a beautiful group called Hendricks out in Ojai, California, Katie and Gay Hendricks. And I worked with them for 2.5 dedicated years and then continued to be part of their community ever since. But I knew enough that when things got that big, it was a better reaction not to scream and shout, but
Right.
instead just to kind of anchor myself in a more of an inner knowing that something big's happening, something big wants to happen, and you're not going to stop it. So get on board. So I called everybody together who was working with us both full time as well as part time, and we had associates, we have consultants. I had at one point 31 consultants who were contracted with us, whom we could send out at a moment's notice, and they were looking to us for work. And I just called as many people together as I could get in a very short time, and then called everybody else individually and said, I don't know what this is, but when pharmaceutical companies start canceling work because of something
Something's going
happening
on.
happen around the world. Let's pay attention. This is big. I kind of knew it was going to be a tsunami. I just didn't know what kind of a tsunami it was going to be,
Right.
just
Right.
because of our access to these incredible clients and the fact that they were calling us and saying we're going to have to call it for the year,
Mm.
not even for
Mm.
a month or two or delay.
Yeah.
No, we're
Yeah.
calling it for the year, and we'll get back to you in due time. I thought this is kind of a remarkable and unprecedented event of my lifetime and possibly many others.
Right.
So I quickly, and I also have the scrappiest, most wonderful um, uh, CPA at the time who, because she was working with entrepreneurial companies, was among the first in there with, she didn't even tell me. She just went and applied for PPP, applied for Small Business Association. So within a really short period of time, we were funded for making this pivot into, you know, slowdown.
Right.
And I'm very grateful to her. And just recognizing that something big was happening and recognizing that we're going to need to pivot and get on board with what was happening. It was out of our control. That was pretty pivotal and pretty important to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And so where did that kind of take you personally from how you wanted to organize your life and kind of get the business relaunched, which is coming up soon.
Hmm. Well, I made the choice to unplug to the extent that I sat on a couch for pretty much 2 years and learned a higher level of meditation. I also went back and pulled out old journals and started mining my journals for poetry I had written, and I put together 500 pages of old poems that I wrote, and then I revamped that. We have a book coming out on that is a poetry book for women, and it's called Sane Response. So I did a lot of things that were just powered down, and and explored, what do I really want to do? If everything is so
Right.
upended, what do I really want to do? And one of the other things that became uh, important to me during the time that we were kind of on hiatus, if you will, is this is going to get super interesting when we come back out, because tech enablement is going to be so important. And
Right.
I happen to have I'm part of a tech startup that is also going on, and we just finished our um, friends and family round, and we're in our A round right now. And I've known for a long time that tech enablement of learning and development inside companies was so critical. And I was watching some of the big financial services and others. I was trying to play with them in that realm. But compliance being what it is, and necessarily so, there were all kinds of constraints on what one can do with tech enablement. But I knew it was going to be a matter of time before compliance learned and made some space for people to learn on phones and learn on tablets and just get outside of classrooms in order to really be well served. So I have a partial patent with a colleague of mine, a business partner of mine. It's now off patent, but it's from 2008, and it was in a high involvement learning platform. And we had it in front of everyone in the early teens, and everyone kept inviting us back, but
Nice.
no one bought it. It was too
Mm,
ahead of its time. And I've been there before. Remember, I was in software in the
right,
early
right.
80s, and I
Early
was
on. Yeah.
I was in a place where we were teaching people, and then it was really for the benefit of the market rather than benefit of the company. And it's just a thing that happens if you happen to be somebody who's willing to play inside the tech world. So so we I've been on the lookout for how to tech enable, but I knew there were constraints inside the Fortune 50 level companies we were working with because of compliance. So we were doing, I think we were the first ones at Bank of America to bring iPads into the classroom, and
Mm,
to have that sanctioned, we had to make sure things like each of the iPads could not talk to the internet. They were erased at the end, and they were authorized that they were erased of the practices that were conducted, et cetera. So it was slow going, but I love the efforts of these companies trying to make it work. Well,
got it. Yes.
what happens then in COVID, as we all well know, is we all had to suffer through the moment where you become a cat inadvertently, because you don't know how to use Zoom. You become a cat in your Zoom call, and you think, I would never suffer through this kind of pain and this kind of learning curve if there were any alternative. So the one of the many things actually that was disruptive, but perhaps helpful to us, is that the entire world got on board with technology.
Right,
And
right.
now everyone knows what a QR code is and how to use it. Everyone understands what a Zoom call is and how to use that technology. And now there's the expectation, not just the hope, but the expectation. Well, how are you going to do that on a smartphone? How will that transfer
Mm,
over to my computer? How will they all work together? So I'm kind of loving the new world. I'd been hoping for it a whole lot long ago,
yeah,
but
yeah.
but now that it's here, it does open up all kinds of wonderful opportunities. And the one thing I will just say that is, I think, so critical. My team and I have been going through this as we speak. When we are going to engage with partners for this tech enablement, it's not enough just to hire people and say, okay, you go do your tech thing and get back to us, because the old world of technology for a small business, but even large businesses, was that tech was ancillary to the business. It was kind of the thing over to the side that helped us from time to time, but really it continued to be that we had this core business that we were up to. But
Right.
what's happened along the way is a higher and higher level of integration between the processes and the engagements of clients, and your ability to map them over to some technology and have that technology truly enable that communication and truly create levels of efficiency that were not even possible before. And you can say, well, a Luddite might say, oh, I don't really want to get into that. But what that does is that relegates you to the obsolete business. You
Right,
have to get
right.
into the game. You have no choice, unless you want to cap your business out at 200 or 250,000, which is usually about the level to which an entrepreneurial company of services, of coaching, and so on can get to without a lot of tech enablement. But if you want to go higher than that, what I'm finding is you need to be looking at the technology as not ancillary but core. It's you don't want the tail wagging the dog, so it's not about the technology, it's still about the service, but it all backs up to, it's about the client experience. And so what I say to people, to my own team, is the old world model was what I would call your special sauce, so let's say tomato sauce, and you got to put it on top of the technology, which could be linguine or fettuccine or ziti.
Right,
I like
right.
food analogies. But the new model is you're not putting your tomato sauce on top of pasta and then picking it up and putting it on a different one if you so choose. The new model is everything that you're doing, you're making tomato fettuccine. So if you've
Mm.
ever seen tomato fettuccine, it's red and you're not getting the tomato sauce out. They're woven together. They
It
go
is
so
woven together. Right.
they're so
Right.
tightly knit to one another that you can't extract one from the other. To
Right.
be able to do that means that I've been really, really good at, for instance, what I do, which is teaching people how to look at nuanced skills associated with being client facing. How do you,
Mm.
I say, the nothing neutral in a client facing interaction, pen to pen, screen to screen, voice to voice, and face to face. There's nothing neutral. So I've been spending years and years and years working with top executives and client facing teams, cross functional, et cetera, helping them get more effective at optimizing how they use every single thing that they do and say and how they show up in order
Mm.
to communicate their trustworthiness in competitive commoditized businesses to clients who have lots of choices. And in the meanwhile, I would turn to my tech people and say, yeah, yeah, make that happen. But I wouldn't really get to know the tech. Well,
Right.
that really burned me. And the way it burned me is Bank of America kindly sponsored me in a beautiful program that cost them hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I'm grateful to them for the investment. They now have in perpetuity licensing on something that replaces some of the classroom time. And they did this in 2017, 18. But I made the choice to go with some wonderful technology people, but I didn't realize when I was making the choices that I was locked onto a kind of technology that was not portable to
Mm.
other clients. So
Right.
here I
Right.
had built
Yeah.
this entire thing with the dream that I'm going to take this and it's going to become a major asset inside other companies that I could, and that was the license agreement I had with the client. And turns out it's not portable. So
Mm.
we've needed to reconstruct the entire thing. And so what I say to my team is, and what we're doing right now is getting knowledgeable at a granular level on what we need technology to do and what each of our resources whom we hire needs to be able to deliver to us. And what we're finding as you get into technology is it's still the wild, wild west in a lot of
Mm.
ways.
Right.
So there's terminology that one provider, say for social media services or for something that we just learned about, um, what's it called? Brand links, I think it's called. Different kinds of technology along the user experience pathway we're trying to tech enable. And I'll go to these different providers and ask them, well, what do you do? And they'll use these terms. And when we dig in, we realize they're saying very different things. And I don't
Mm.
think it's a nefarious intent. Everyone shows up wanting to do well. The problem is that I think that the standardization and the codification of what it means to be tech enabled, especially in the business I'm in, which is learning and development and coaching services, I think it's still growing. It's
Yeah.
still growing. So we're all, cowboys out here trying to make
Big
good
inflection
things
point.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big inflection point. Yeah.
Well, Molly, all very exciting stuff, but we are just about out of time. But we always
hmm
have one last question we always ask our guests, and that's what kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who perhaps has their eyes on the corner office themselves, or like you, wants to be an entrepreneur someday and create an exciting company?
Uh, Thank you for that invitation. I think the thing for me when I talk to people, and maybe it's just because thematically it's up for me and my team right now, have a bias for action. So that's
Mm.
a really key piece. We do need really informed decision making and we need a bias for action because there's many of us are the oldest people in the room now. There's nobody else to look to for am I doing it the right way and get our little gold
Right.
star. At this stage it's just do it and see what happens and get the feedback and then be prepared to shift. And the other is the new environment is really one of collaboration, and that is brand new. It used to be that I know something and I can prove to you that I know something because I have all of these other clients who are willing to speak on my behalf. So you'll get to know what I know after you pay me something. Well, that is
Right.
not the case anymore. I think
Mm,
it's Gary Vaynerchuk, whom I like very much. Gary V says,
right.
jab, 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 right hook is the name of his book, which I recommend. And it is this idea, give it away, give it away, give it away. You're cultivating a clientele from the very first moment that they get to know you on a social media or any kind of a what's called a traffic feed or any kind of a feed that lets them start to know you. And so nurturance is really important before you start trying to sell somebody.
Right.
So we're about to go out and find out just how this works when our tech enablement is fully pulled together. I'm hoping by the time this launches or by the
Yeah.
time this airs, I'll
Yeah.
be in that position already. But it'll be interesting to start getting the feedback from the marketplace, pivot, make some nuanced decisions, and enable ourselves to really come back out in a way that is of genuine service, that cultivates real connection to clients and adds value to their day and impact in their client relationships, because we win when our clients are able to actually connect effectively with their own clients, and we want everything we're doing to lead to that kind of a success story on the part of our own clients.
So true. So true. Well, Molly Sargent, CEO and founder of ProImpress, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.